I'd like to welcome all of you to our webinar this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're at, API Monetization, Unlocking the Values of Your Data. I'm Bill Oakes, Director of Product Marketing for API Management at CA Technologies, and with me is Dana Crane, Senior Product Manager of our Developer Portal line of products. Before we get started today, just a couple of housekeeping chores. We'll have a 10-minute Q&A at the end of the presentation. Between now and then, if you have questions, don't hesitate to send them in through the chat window in the sidebar. And tomorrow morning, as you heard, we are recording this, we'll send you an email that will provide links to the deck and this recording. So with that, today we're going to take a quick look at the application economy and see how this is driving API monetization opportunities. At that point, Dana will take over and talk about the value of APIs and how to unlock that value. He'll touch upon API monetization best practices and then give you an example of how to monetize and expose data APIs. And with that, we'll do the aforementioned Q&A. Now, some of you might not be aware of the migration to the application economy. Briefly, it's centralizing the point of access to the enterprise and its resources to an API gateway. By allowing the gateway to be a protocol bridge between end users and partners and corporate resources, much of the pain of dealing with legacy versus new technologies such as mobile, IoT, and cloud is completely eliminated. More importantly, it allows enterprise data to be used in new ways. This may drive value, and often with value comes monetization. So why the push to monetize? Well, there's some very good reasons. First, to extend the brand of the enterprise to new audiences, to extend the reach, and one actually hopes to make money. So we'll take a look at some real-world examples of each of these, but when you look at monetization, you have to ask, well, who pays? Does the developer pay? Does the enterprise pay the developer? Does the customer pay to the enterprise or developer, or does anyone pay? And the answer invariably is, it depends. So let's take a look at the monetization examples and see how this might actually work in some real-world environments. First, a great example of extending your brand is Maps. Google, Microsoft with Bing, and Yahoo all have excellent mapping solutions and all provide APIs for developers excuse me, to utilize their maps and applications at no charge. Why would they do this? After all, developing and maintaining maps is very complex, requires constant updating, and is definitely not cheap. Well, that's easy. Maps tie to search, search ties to advertising, advertising ties to revenue. So by using Google Maps or Microsoft or Yahoo, the end user is more likely to use the associated search. And extending that reach indirectly leads to revenue. So extending the reach. A great example of extending the reach is something most of us use regularly. There's quite a few shopping aggregators. Nextag and Shopping.com are two good ones. These apps were built using APIs from some of the leading electronic commerce enterprises. So you as the consumer might be looking for the latest Sony 4K TV, but you definitely want the best price. So you plug that into your shopping aggregator like Nextag, and the apps use those APIs to bring up the item, the price, the availability from leading electronic commerce sites. You see who has your new Sony 4K TV at the best price, you make your decision, you purchase it, and both Nextag and the electronic commerce enterprise split the revenue in some fashion. So at the end of the day, you win, the developer wins, and the enterprise wins. This is a very successful model for electronic commerce enterprises. A great example is Expedia. They pull in about $2 billion a year using this exact model. So actual revenue. These are companies that have APIs that actually tie directly to revenue. BlueJeans is a cloud-based video conferencing company that released an API for developers to include for video conferencing in their application. The consumer of the app pays BlueJeans directly for actual time used with that API. The developer gets added value to his or her app at no cost to him. Recurly, a great cloud-based billing solution. Again, the developer provides added value to his or her app by allowing online billing, and the consumer of the service only pays for actual usage. PayPal is probably the one most familiar to you. Anyone who's used eBay and completed an eBay purchase is very familiar with the PayPal window that gets launched through an API, and you get to then easily pay for your item. And PayPal then takes a percentage of that from the seller. Amazon Web Services. Yet another example of a simple API call to implement a cloud solution, and the enterprise only pays for actual consumption. Finally, the most interesting example in my book is Twilio. Twilio provides cloud-based communication like texting, email, and voice over IP communication. So you might be thinking, well, who cares? I can do all that. I have a mobile device, I have a laptop or a desktop. And yeah, you can. But let's change the environment a little bit. You join a dating site and you're feeling kind of exposed. You want to meet that special someone, but we all know that dating sites have trolling issues. So how do you communicate without exposing email or phone numbers or personal information? So a great example of who uses that is eHarmony. They accomplish exactly that, so that when John calls Jane or Robin calls Frank, only the first name is exposed, whether it's text, email, whatever. That provides the security blanket needed for this kind of site. The members of eHarmony, in this case, pay for actual uses through their membership fees. Finally, I'll end with a quick look at data API types. So you can see there's quite a few out there, and Dana's going to cover quite a bit of this. But the one thing I wanted to point out is that aggregating some of these APIs to provide a unique value and greater monetization opportunities is an emerging trend. So I think you'll see that very quickly in the near future. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dana to walk you through data API types and unlocking the value of your APIs. Dana?
Thanks, Bill. If you could pass me the ball. I think I'm now presenter. So as Bill showed you, there's quite a few APIs out there that are monetized today. What I want to focus in on is the data APIs and really show you the power that these data APIs provide. Now, this is a screenshot that gives you a little bit of an idea of where we are today. And you can see that most of the data APIs that are provided today are associated with opendata.gov initiatives. That is, governments who have opened up public data to the public and made it freely available, or NGOs who are managing their own data sets. Now, even though this data is not monetized, it really shows the power of data APIs. I'm going to go ahead and give you an idea of what that looks like through a study that McKinsey has done. So a recent McKinsey report shown here gives you an idea that these sources of open data could be worth as much as $3 trillion globally to the companies that you see here, the kinds of industries you see here, from education to oil and gas to healthcare. Really what they're talking about is that these kinds of industries can use this open data not only to decrease costs, but also to generate new revenues. The idea here is that the more data you have to mash up, the more advantages you have to gain. So let me make that a little bit more real for you by diving in and giving you some good examples here. My favorite industry, and there's many, many industries that this can benefit, but my favorite one is insurance. Insurance has actuarial data sets that date back, in some cases, hundreds of years. And that's data about you and me, ordinary people, how we live our lives, you know, what our salaries are, what our expectations are, what our businesses are like, what our jobs are like. All of this information is terrific information for target marketers. As most target marketers will tell you, the more marketing data is available, the better they can target a segment. But most insurance companies don't make that information widely available. There's a number of concerns, obviously, with the sensitivity of that information or the privacy concerns with that information, but once it's scrubbed from a data set, that makes a tremendous source of data mining, data research for marketers. And this is the kind of example you can think of a teacher. When they teach in a classroom up until retirement age, within 5 years, they typically pass away. Whereas if you are a non-teacher in that same scenario, if you're a principal, for example, or a guidance counselor, you can expect to live 10 to 15 years longer. That's just one kind of actuarial information that's buried in these data sets that can be extremely valuable in the hands of the right marketer. So that kind of information, once unlocked, can be mashed up across many, many data sets, giving you much more information and much more value out of it. Now, there's other kinds of data APIs that are invaluable for companies looking to do startups and create new products and services. One example is transportation data. So transportation data that's centrally collected or even crowdsourced has resulted already in the creation of some really cool apps. One that I use is Waze, that helps you sort of beat the traffic on the way home. It gives you an idea of where the traffic is right now and allows you to route around it to make your drive home a little easier. So that's one way that companies are starting to use these open data sets or collect data on the fly and make it available to you to provide you with some value. And that's creating new businesses and unlocking new innovations out there. Now, most commonly, what we see is that companies allow themselves to benchmark against competitors. So if I've got information that's, about my competitor or from the industry itself that's been scrubbed of any real ability to pinpoint who this is, we can still use it as best practices data. And that allows us to make better decisions. For example, right now in the healthcare industry, that's an exploding industry when it comes to data being available. And that patient data, again, scrubbed of any privacy concerns concerning information. Once that's aggregated, we can start to put that information together, sharing diagnostic information, and that can potentially reduce the cost of treatment and lead to better health incomes as more and more hospitals compare themselves against others as well and reduce costs. Similarly, in the utilities industry, what we're seeing right now is the sharing of data for energy consumption. And that's mostly among and across electrical grids supported by smart grid initiatives or smart meter initiatives. And that kind of information, once it's made publicly available, you can have people like building managers measuring their own buildings' energy consumption against those buildings within the same block or in the same region or in the same county. And that can help drive down the cost of managing those buildings. And as well, it can help you save costs and save energy going forward as well. So most of us are in an enterprise, and we collect data on a day-to-day basis. And that data tends to be fairly well bound, either within the enterprise itself or maybe even within just our business unit. And it's very rare that we make it available to other business units within our own enterprise. But there's a lot of data that gets gathered that's actually very, very valuable within our enterprise. One of the things that happens on a day-to-day basis is administrative data. Things like website logs, things that we could use possibly to benchmark ourselves against other sister, parent, daughter companies within the enterprise and understand who's driving more traffic or how to generate more traffic just through a website log. Now, if you think about other information like reference data, things like product information and service information that can get out to aggregators, that can expand the market reach of your enterprise, what Bill was talking about with aggregators out there. And the kind of aggregate data that we see on a day-to-day basis as well. Things that bring together information about sales of products or usage of services. All that stuff can be segmented and bound within that industry or shared amongst the industries to help you benchmark better against your competition. Unfortunately, most of this stuff is bound to the organization, as I said. It doesn't get out of the business unit, but if it did, it would allow us to make better decisions going forward. And the point is that there is a big barrier in place to being able to share that kind of data. I'll talk a little bit about those barriers here. So the roadblocks that we typically see in an enterprise, and you probably see them as well, typically come from the people within the enterprise, such as your technical architect. One of the things I typically hear from technical architects is they would never expose a database directly to developers. Bad choice. They prefer to build out some layer of abstraction on top of it first, maybe move the data out of that back-end database, abstract it away, make it easier to access in, say, a data warehouse so it doesn't impact the day-to-day recording of data in that database. We don't want people writing to the database and destroying your data model. There's lots of really good reasons not to give developers access directly to a database. But if you're going to build out these solutions around your data, you're going to start introducing a lot of overhead. For number one, this becomes an IT project. So IT resources have to get allocated here. And then you've got to start that whole design process, understanding how those users will use that data, how we're going to plan to cope with the load on that back end. But beyond just the physical, how do I do it, there's also privacy concerns or legal concerns from your legal department. What about reuse of that data? How do I make it available for reuse? Do I expose myself potentially to lawsuits if that information is not correct? And finally, the business folks, giving away data within the organization, how does that make any sense? That's my competitive advantage. So there's lots of good reasons not to do this, but the point here is there's lots of good reasons to do it as well. And as Bill talked about it, the app economy is really a seismic shift within our industry. And it's really starting to bury those traditional enterprises that see their own data as their own fiefdom. The fact is, now quicker and easier to expose your data to developers than ever before, just by placing an API on top of that data set. And that can really lead to new revenue streams and some pretty good ROI too, depending on the monetization model you choose. So let me go into a little bit of information now about monetization models. This is a slide I pulled off of John Musser's SlideShare PowerPoint that really talks about the API monetization business models that we're seeing out there. Now, Bill alluded to a few of them up front. What I want to do is focus in on the simplest ones, which is developer pays. So developer pays is the most direct ROI model there is, and there's quite a few of them here. I'm going to relate them directly to data APIs, and hopefully you'll see one that matches the way that your business works, so you can find out how you might derive ROI from your own data. So for enterprises with proprietary data or otherwise valuable information, you can expose it via data API to make new revenue streams or allow developer access for reuse, for mashup with your own data or other data sets. Now, a good example of the pay-as-you-go way of doing things is through Google's BigQuery. BigQuery is a terrific service for just uploading your data. You can get it all into the Google Cloud very, very simply, straightforward. There's no charge up front, but what you do is you're paying as you go, because every time you access that data, every time you make a query of that data, you're going to get charged. So the real value here is querying the data, not storing or uploading it. Moz has a different model, a tiered model, and this is something we see very, very commonly. There's a paywall that's put in place. You get free usage. In this case for Moz, you get free usage by looking up SEO information about billions of URLs for free. So if you're running small, infrequent queries with small data sets, just looking up a few URLs, that's completely free. But then the paywall hits as soon as you start pulling in millions of URLs or you start running more frequent reports. So that's a very, very typical scenario that we see out there. A paywall is sort of a teaser to get you started, get you hooked, and then when you want to get a flood of data, when you really find this valuable, that's when they start charging you. Open Corporates is a great example of a freemium model. So Open Corporates is sort of like the new Dun & Bradstreet. It's a free way of looking up company information if you're a non-corporate user. If you're a corporate user, however, if you're using it for private use, that's when the model kicks in. They start to charge you. So free for non-corporate users, for NGOs, for people just fooling around or creating information, mashing up information for free. But as soon as you want to start charging for it yourself, you've got to start kicking back in and helping to pay for running this data set. Microsoft's Bing engine, Bill alluded to that earlier. Bing has a way of doing unit-based charging, so you can buy, say, 100,000 hits, a sort of bucket of hits for a small price, and then you can access their search engine by making API calls to pull back that information and mash it up with whatever you're trying to get done. That kind of bucket type of, buy a set number of API calls is popular. More popular, though, is the per hit API. So every time you hit an API, maybe you get charged 1/10,000th of a penny. It can be much easier to keep track of that way rather than understanding when your buckets are running out. And finally, there's Stripe. When it comes to transaction fees, Stripe is sort of the new shiny kid on the block. These are the guys that allow you to do one-touch payments via your iOS device. And what they'll do is they'll charge you a percentage of that transaction. So a very common model. Lots of others, PayPal obviously also does this, but charging you a percentage of that transaction every time you make a transaction. So there's lots of great ways to monetize these APIs, lots of great ways to create new revenue streams, whether you've got proprietary data that nobody else is offering or whether you've got some unique service in your enterprise. What you need to do is match it up against the best way that your enterprise is able to realize value and charge for that. But to enable each of these business models, you're going to need some infrastructure. And I'll talk a little bit about what CA offers in this realm. And what we have is a few products here. The one I want to focus on is the API Developer Portal. The API Developer Portal is the mechanism for unlocking all that value in your data and APIs. It allows you to onboard, manage, and empower your developer community, and that's really going to be the way to create value-added applications for your APIs. Those third-party developers that come on board, that create applications against your APIs, that expand your market reach or help you derive new revenue streams from entering new markets or new channels. And the API Developer Portal is currently available as either an on-premise solution or as a SaaS solution, as you see here. Each of those solutions, whether it's on-premise or SaaS, is backed by our API Gateway. And that's what really provides that API security to make sure that whether you're exposing a data set, you've got protection in place, or whether you're exposing a traditional API, you're layering on things like OAuth 2 to make sure that those back-end APIs are protected. But the Gateway also provides you with a lot of flexibility on how you integrate your API management initiative with the rest of your enterprise assets and resources. So that's a brief overview. Drilling into the API portal and what it provides for you when it comes to exposing those data APIs and monetizing those data APIs. So one of the key things we provide out of the box with the API portal is the ability to publish your data APIs through a wizard. So very simple, straightforward, sort of click button driven way of exposing your data APIs in a very simple and automatic way. And will automatically generate the interactive documentation for that data set as well. So you'll be able to have your developers instantly gain access to that data API and start playing with it to understand the kind of information that's available for them and how to incorporate it into their applications. When it comes to monetization, we can also facilitate that. We have what we call a revenue planner that allows you to assign monetary value to each of your APIs, either on a per hit basis or perhaps on a monthly basis with plans or per developer, so on. There's lots of different ways that you can apply these API monetization structures and types that I've talked about to your APIs. And then finally, pulling all that information together, we provide an API catalog. So your developers can come in and see instantly what kinds of data APIs and other APIs you've made available on your portal, and then understand how you offer them, how they're priced, how they can be accessed, what kind of plans you put in place around those. So all that's available on the CA API Developer Portal today. Let me give you a good example of how to do API monetization via portal correctly. So what you're seeing here is a screenshot from the Weather Underground, and what they've created is a bunch of packages. In this case, 3 different packages, each with an escalating number of APIs. So depending on which package you sign up for, you'll get access to 6, 12, or 18 APIs. The best way to think about these packages is to think about your cable company packages. So when you buy a cable company package, you'll get access to more or less channels depending on which package you choose. Similarly, depending on which API package you choose, you'll get access to more or less APIs. Now, they also offer a separate way of looking at APIs, not only which APIs do I get access to, but in what ways do I get access to those APIs, and that's usually through plans. What they offer here is an escalating number of plans that provide greater quota or greater access, in other words, more calls per day, to each of those APIs within the package. That's exactly the kind of model that we support on the CA API Developer Portal. So where does all this start? This is a screenshot of our wizard, and it allows you to very simply publish your API, and in this case, your data APIs directly via the portal. All you need to do is select a data source. Today, we support JDBC-enabled data sources that are SQL data sources. NoSQL is something we're looking at and coming up early next year. We should have a assertion that allows you to access NoSQL as well. Today, we're focused on SQL databases. So choose any one of the SQL databases within your enterprise that you've already loaded up here within the portal. You can then choose any table within that data source and choose any elements within that table. So if you've got more than one element, you can select which ones you want to expose, or you can just expose all of them. You can choose a format, typically JSON for application developers because people are building mobile apps these days, but also available as XML or CSV if you like. And then choose a level of metadata. Typically, we would choose all the metadata in the database to be exposed here because what we want to do is pull in that metadata in order to generate interactive documentation on the fly for you. We have an execute query button within the wizard, and that allows you to make a quick call out to the database to ensure that A, it's still available, and B, the information that we pull back and show you is what you expect to see given what you've chosen, the table you've chosen, the data elements within that table that you've chosen. And also you want to check that format to make sure that it is coming back as JSON if that's what you've chosen. You can then hit the next steps and walk through the wizard, assign a name to this, assign a version to it, give it an endpoint on the gateway where it's going to be accessible from, and then layer on your protection. For example, you might want to put in place SQL injection protection if this is an SQL backend. You might want to layer on OAuth 2 for authentication as well. All that's driven through the wizard. And once you save that, it'll then become available immediately on the portal with that interactive documentation so your developers can start reading through and understanding that new data source that's available to them via their API. Now, once you've got your APIs in place, you want to start understanding what the data model what the revenue model can look like for those APIs. What we provided you with is a revenue planner that's inside of the API portal. It allows you to go ahead and work through all the aspects you might want to monetize. For example, one-time registration fees. Anytime a developer comes into the portal, you might charge them some upfront fee before they can get an account on the portal. When it comes to account plans and API plans, account plans you can really think of as those packages that Weather Underground was offering. So best practices is to offer an escalating number of APIs associated with each of these account plans. Account plans are typically bronze, silver, gold, platinum, diamond, that kind of tiering model. So it's fairly simple to package those up and make them available to your developers and assign typically a monthly fee, maybe a $20 fee, $30 fee, $50 fee, depending on the value of the APIs within each of those account plans. You can also assign API plans. And API plans you can think of as providing greater access. So this is where you impose a quota limitation, maybe 1,000 hits per day or 1,000,000 hits a month or something like that. You might also charge a monthly fee for this, Or best practices, you might charge a per hit fee. So 1/100th of a penny to access an API in production, or maybe 1/1,000,000th of a penny to access it in test mode. You can have a number of different API plans. Out of the box, we provide you with a sandbox, a test, and a production plan to get you started. One of the other ways to think about this is you always want to have a non-monetized plan as well. So you want to make sure that you've got, say, a bronze plan that gives you access to maybe only public APIs, lower value APIs that are never monetized, and that allow your developers to get started right away playing with those APIs and understanding how to use them before we start charging them. So the sandbox plan is another good example. It might only give you 1,000 hits per day and maybe only 1 call per second, but again, you wouldn't want to monetize that. You would want to reserve that to allow your developers to play with those APIs, understand how they work, and then maybe monetize it when they move their application into production and start hitting your production APIs instead. That's when we might want to start charging maybe 1/10,000th of a penny per hit or something like that. The Revenue Planner allows you to create all of these plans and price all of these plans. And once you've got your model that you think is good for you, you might want to also understand how this works out into the future. There's also a growth tab on here where you can put in growth percentages, how you expect your account plans to be adopted over time, or your API plans to be adopted over time by entering, say, 10, 15, 20% growth in each of these fields. And once you're happy with that model, you can hit that Generate Report button and get an idea on a quarterly basis how much revenue you might generate, or maybe on a yearly basis how much revenue you might generate off of this initiative. This allows you to sort of play with some what-if scenarios, changing some values, and really gives you an idea what the ROI can be by generating this kind of a report. Once you're happy with that kind of ROI model you've got in place, you can hit the Apply to Plans button, and that will actually update your billing engine. So there's no need to create any of these entities, no need to create any of those account plans or API plans. Those will all be conveyed directly down to the engine, and all of the fees associated with each of those plans will be communicated as well. So we're relying on that billing engine to do all the math for us and send us that value back at the end of the month, which becomes an invoice that then appears for the developer and for you, so you can check those two together. And that essentially is the way it works. Very seamless way of bridging that monetization to your billing and providing it back as invoices on a monthly basis to your developers. Finally, the way that we tie all this up is making it available through an API catalog. The API catalog has two tabs. The first one is our APIs. This is where you provide information about your APIs, some sort of a way for developers to get a quick understanding of the kinds of APIs you're offering, whether they're public or private, whether they're made available in sandbox mode and just need an API key to hit them, or whether they're actually production level APIs that are guarded by some OAuth 2 authentication requirements. You can also make links from here to interactive documentation so they can explore further about that API to understand more details about it. This is a good way to give your customers an overview very quickly of what's available on your portal. And we also have a Plans tab. Clicking on that Plans tab will bring up the account plans and the API plans that give them more details about how those APIs have been made available, through a quota, through a rate limit, and if it's monetized, each of the values associated with the monetized component of each of those plans as well. And clicking on that Learn More button can help you understand the Silver plan has 4 or 5 of those APIs you saw in the previous tab associated with it, whereas a Gold plan might have 10 or 12 APIs associated with it. And in this way, your developers can have a great idea before they even sign up on the portal of what's offered and how they might take advantage of that. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation and I'll open it up for Q&A. Here's a good question. Is there an established method or set of criteria that can help a financial institution prioritize API activity? Where do we start and why? So one of the things that CA offers is our API Academy. Our API Academy has done a number of webinars, a number of one-on-one consultations with a number of actors in different industries. The financial industry, we have a number of customers there, and what typical questions they have is, how can I get started? Where is the biggest value for me? Where's the biggest bang for my buck? These guys are very talented. They can come in, give you a great idea of where to start, give you a great idea of the low-hanging fruit that can give you the best ROI on your investment. So I would really recommend starting with them, get them to give you some good advice on how to get started. They've done this with many other customers previously and have some great best practices to bring to the table as well. So that's where I would start. There's another question here about, or maybe a comment, IBM IT Architect, focusing on SOA. APIs are a challenge here. Their challenge here is quantifying the value of the data to justify the business case to expose it as an API. There will be some back-end integration. You're not just going to point your API gateway to your database and expose the CRUD services. I totally agree with you. That is one of the things that you have to worry about. You never want to just immediately start exposing your data. You've got to look at that data, how it's actually put together, and how you want to make it available. In some cases, you might want to give just read-only access to it. Exposing complete CRUD to a back-end API, there's got to be some real give and take. There's got to be some real discussion around that. Again, you might want to abstract it as shown here. There's always something that can happen with that back end, and there's a lot of great concerns. That's why, as I mentioned before, your IT architects, your enterprise architects are always going to put some conditions in the way of getting this exposed. You've really got to pick and choose what that low-hanging fruit can be that you can expose directly as APIs. And maybe you don't start this with a project that is actually exposing that data API to the external world. After all, you might not be able to control it as easily as you might if you expose that data API within your own premises only. So within the enterprise, making it available to your own developers is typically the way a lot of our enterprise customers start out, making sure that they can manage it on a manageable basis within the enterprise before they go external. Have you seen any examples of access to government data where the government is monetizing the data in order to make money? So I am currently not aware of any opendata.gov initiatives that are actually charging money to access that back end. Most of the ones that I am familiar with have been mandates from the government to open up those data sets. After all, it is public information that has been gathered from the public based on your tax money. So this is really that tax money at work, exposing that data back to you as the owners of that data, as the progenitors of that data. So I am not aware of any ones that charge. That doesn't mean there isn't value in those open data sets. As I was talking about, that McKinsey report is actually a very interesting report looking at the value you can derive from that. So by them making it available back to those taxpayers, a lot of those taxpayers are now focused on mining that data and finding different ways of mashing it up with other existing data sets in order to provide real value, new services, new products. So there is value there. Are governments directly monetizing it? I haven't seen that model yet. Another question about whether we're monetizing existing APIs or an interface to build and monetize the API. So what we are giving as CA with our tools is a way for you to build that API interface to your data. So we're really giving you the tool out of the box to be able to establish an API directly against that data set. You can then go ahead and use that same tool, that same portal, to be able to monetize that data set. So on a per hit basis, or by bundling it up into a package that you then offer on a monthly basis. So we're offering you both the ability to create an interface very quickly via a wizard in front of your data API, and then be able to take that data API, incorporate it into a account plan, expose it through a API plan that gives you access in different ways to that data, and be able to price those ways of accessing that data API. I have an example here from one of our attendees. Apparently the Singapore government does expose government to business data in order to help them provide business efficiency. And they do charge a small fee for that. So there are examples here of government to business, apparently, over in Singapore, actually charging access to data from a data.gov kind of an API. If there's no more questions, I believe we're coming up to the top of the hour, so I will wrap it up at this point. If there's any further questions, please don't hesitate to either contact Bill Oakes or myself, Dana Crane, dana.crane@ca.com, and you'll be able to, we'll be able to get back to you right away with those answers. With that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up, and I'll thank you all for attending today, and we'll get back to you via email with any outstanding questions. Thanks very much for attending.
Thank you very much.